Nature doesn't waste energy. Let me say that again. Nature doesn't waste energy. Everything that nature does has a purpose to it. There's a purpose to every organ in our body. There's a purpose to the sun, right? There's a purpose to fur in animals. There's a purpose to bees pollinating, right? There's a purpose to bears hibernating. Everything has a purpose. Everything that nature does has a purpose, right? Nature doesn't waste energy. Energy doesn't just disappear, right? You can't just get rid of energy. It has to be utilized and or it needs to be transformed, right? But energy is not something that you could just get rid of. You can't just get rid of it, right? And what a lot of people don't realize is that trauma is also energy. Trauma is also a form of energy, whether people are aware of it or not aware of it, right? And just like every other form of energy, trauma doesn't go to waste. Trauma doesn't go to waste. Nature won't allow trauma to go to waste. Like I said, nature doesn't waste energy. So, what ultimately ends up happening is that trauma serves a purpose. Okay? Trauma serves a purpose. And because it serves a purpose, there's a natural inclination to attach to it, to attach to the trauma because it serves a purpose, right? And the natural response, whenever you hear somebody say that they have trauma or you find out that somebody has trauma, the natural response that we mostly have is to try to find out the root cause of the trauma, right? You want to pinpoint the origin of the trauma in order to fix it, right? Let's find out what started the trauma, right? Let's follow the breadcrumbs, right? Let's talk about our childhood, right? This is one approach to psychology where you target the origin of the trauma in order to try to fix it, right? Now, the problem with this is that trying to find the origin of trauma can be a bottomless pit. Okay, once you go down that rabbit hole, there's no guarantee that you'll know where the trauma came from or what caused it, right? The mind is too complex to do that. It's too there's so many layers to it that trying to figure out the origin of your trauma could take a lifetime, right? Now, there's another approach to psychology where instead of trying to find out the origin of the trauma, instead of trying to figure out where it all started, you focus on what purpose the trauma has. What is the purpose of the trauma instead of the origin of the trauma? So you focus on the purpose of the phenomenon instead of the cause of the phenomenon. It's a different way to look at it because, like I said, nature doesn't waste energy. If there's attachment to a trauma, it's usually for a reason, right? So when you clinch to trauma, it's usually because the person consciously or unconsciously thinks it's useful. Like I'm gonna hold on to this trauma because fill in the blank, right? Fill it whatever you think is useful or whatever you can use from that trauma, that energy, you're gonna clinch onto it and you're gonna fill in the blank. I'm holding on to this trauma because fill in the blank, right? This idea of focusing on the purpose of the phenomenon instead of the cause is known as teleology, right? You focus on the purpose. What does the energy serve, right? What is the purpose of the phenomenon, not what caused the phenomenon. What caused the phenomenon is a bottomless pit, right? The trauma isn't going to go to waste. Nature's going to use it, right? Now, a lot of people, they hold trauma in order to pursue goals, right? Like sometimes these goals are unconscious. So somebody, for example, who they're subconsciously or consciously seeking attention, right? Or sympathy, they will take on the role of a victim, right? Something, when they have a martyr complex, they'll take on to a victim personality in order to get attention, right? This is a syndrome. This is textbook syndrome, right? So I'm reminded of the gladiators, right? Back in the day when they would fight in the Colosseum and in the arenas. These gladiators, these warriors that will go out and fight, right? Their life was on the line every day. Their soul was up for grabs every single day, and they were in a very traumatic environment, right? These gladiators that would go out and fight in these arenas, they suffered every form of abuse that you can think of growing up. Okay, these gladiators were abused by the guards, right? A lot of people don't know that these gladiators suffered through some of the most horrific, traumatic, and abusive experiences that you can think of, right? Leading up to them having to fight for their lives in the arena. And of course, there was a system in place where if you fought long enough, or you won a certain amount of fights, and you were alive and you didn't die, you were granted your freedom, right? And these gladiators would work their way up to their freedom. They would get their freedom. They would be let go, right? But then some of these gladiators, right, despite being in these horrific environments where you're fighting for your life and then you get your freedom, they would come back. They would go back to the arena voluntarily, right? Not against their will, voluntarily. They would go back to continue that lifestyle. Now, why would you do that, right? Why would anybody do that? Well, like I said, when you experience trauma, it's hard to let go of it, right? Because nature doesn't waste energy. You're going to find a purpose for that trauma. So what would these gladiators get from these traumatic experiences? They would get fame, right? They would get admiration. They would get attention. They would get a dopamine spike, right? That relief after you won the battle, right? A lot of them had addictions to adrenaline, to danger, right? There was a purpose that the trauma was serving them, okay? And when they were let go, they would come back voluntarily because their psychological needs were no longer being met, right? This is the thing about psychological needs. We're born with needs, biological needs. You know, you need food, water, protein, all that jazz, all that good stuff. But we're also born with psychological needs. And we don't know what these needs are. It varies from person to person, right? A psychological need for attention for one person might be a psychological need for sympathy for another. So when you experience trauma, if your psychological needs are being met, you're going to hold on to it, right? Like people who say, no one understands me, right? Well, why would they hold on to that mentality? Why would they hold on to that martyr complex, that victim mentality? Well, when people say no one understands me, there's an underlying tone that they're special, that they're unique, right? No one understands me because I'm special, I'm unique, right? This is a psychological need being met. I'm unique, I'm special. I'm not like everybody else, right? I put myself above others and no one understands me, right? I'm one of a kind. I'm one in a million, right? It's an excuse not to change, right? Why do people want to change? People want to change because it's not easy to change. If it was easy to change, everybody would do it, right? Change is a commodity because not everybody can do it. That's why it has value, right? Do you see what I'm saying? It's not the experience in and of itself that causes the trauma. It's the meaning that you give it, right? The meaning that you latch onto in order to meet your psychological needs. The psychological need to be acknowledged, to be sympathized for, the psychological need for attention, whatever the case may be, you get something out of it. There's an upside to getting the trauma and holding on to it, right? Nature doesn't waste energy. So the attachment to the experience is the trauma. It's not the experience itself, it's your attachment. Like I'm gonna hold on to this because this is gonna give me fill in the blank. Right? This is gonna give me attention, or it's gonna give me sympathy, or whatever the case may be. That martyr complex, right? So once you have a trauma and you use your ninja grip to hold on to it because it's useful, right? I can use this, right? Then this is the reason why a lot of people have the same experience but have a different reaction, right? People experience the same thing, but people have a different reaction, which is evidence, which is proof that the past doesn't define you, right? If we had a cause and effect, and that's just the way it is, cause and effect, then everybody who experienced the cause would have the same effect. But that's not the case. We know that. We know that people have similar experiences with different outcomes, right? Some people are going to latch on to the trauma, right? Because nature doesn't waste energy, right? Trauma is a form of energy. So you're going to use that energy to serve a purpose, to get something that is going to meet your psychological needs, right? When you let go of the trauma, you also let go of the psychological needs that are being met, right? So, like I said, nature doesn't let trauma go to waste. Our emotional circuitry won't allow it, right? You do have a conscious choice of letting go of the trauma, right? I'm reminded of a quote. Let me see, from a psychologist, Alfred Adler. Okay, let me read this to you. No experience. Hold on. No experience is in itself a cause of our success or failure. We do not suffer from the shock of our experiences, the so-called trauma, but instead we make out of them whatever serves our purposes. We are not determined by our experiences. The meaning we give them is itself determining. Alfred Adler. And I just thought that hit the bullseye. That really drove it home. At the end of the day, it is what it is. It's going to be what it's going to be. And that's life.